Okay, welcome back to the Investigative Journal on this January 11th, 2016 day on our calendar. I'm your host, Greg Anthony. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. You can catch my show every evening from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. That's on FirstAmendmentRadio.com. My guest today is Bert Krantz from the Alamo Ministry, and he's been on my show many times over the years. And today we wanted to really discuss a little bit about the Tony Alamo criminal case and basically what's happening now with Tony. He's been in jail for a number of years, and Bert's got some information regarding this he'd like to speak about. And I think it's, just let me say this, there was a three-pronged approach to bring down this Christian ministry, who in my estimation was doing absolutely nothing wrong. Expressing their First Amendment rights both constitutionally for the rights of freedom of religion and freedom of speech. And because of their stance, I believe, outing the Vatican not only as the Antichrist, the Vatican institution, which isn't unusual if you look back to the Protestant reformers. Basically, they were saying the same exact thing. The only thing that's happened over the years is Rome has found a way to mute this story and basically through the ecumenical movement create a situation where there is no criticism in the Bible regarding Rome. People look the other way. And so what happened was when Tony Alamo's ministry felt that you have to include 100% of the information, not just 90%, like many churches do, they were attacked, and it's been going on for 40 years. So in 2008, they charged Tony with the Mann Act, which is a violation that I've talked about, which is a lukewarm way of saying, there wasn't any sexual problems here, but we're going to get you for transporting minors across state lines. And basically at churches that were in one state and they do retreats in other states. And so through about 5 or 6 girls who were disgruntled. You can imagine if you have a ministry where you take in all people that there are going to be situations where people are not happy because of the way the ministry operated. And what they basically did was say, look, this is a house of God. We do things in a manner that's upholding to the Lord. And people that didn't follow that were asked to leave. And that's basically the way it was. So there are just these disgruntled people who work together with the government. And when you look at the story closely, you see that it was a manipulation to put him in jail. And basically they succeeded in a trial that I call worse than a kangaroo court when you look at this thing. And he now sits in jail on a charge with 175 years stuck on him by the judge. Then they went after the children, and Bert Krantz knows well because they basically stole or kidnapped his children, claiming there was child abuse. But after I looked into it, there was actually no child abuse at all. And what they did was state that, because they didn't, some parents felt they didn't need to vaccinate their children. And I understand that too. I would never put one of those needles in my arm after reading stories like this. And there's a story out there right now which shows you that over 22,000 nurses have now stood strong against mandatory vaccination for health workers, the law that's just been passed. And these nurses who do not want to take vaccinations may be fired for that. So that was all they could find. There was no abuse, but the children were still taken away. Then the next prong was property. The Alamo ministries had worked hard, the people had worked hard, and basically had a number of different churches and property and things that they had done to in unison, not just Tony Alamo. This was the property of all these people who worked together, and the government systematically is taking that away now through civil lawsuits, and Bert Krantz knows well about that. So that's basically a three-pronged approach they used to subvert the Constitution. And if you listen to my show a couple days ago, you see the Constitution has been subverted in so many ways. Look at the situation in Oregon now with the taking of this property. And I think I had a constitutional attorney give you about a 10-minute reason why this is unconstitutional. And what's happening to the Alamo ministry is unconstitutional, not only for the taking of their property, but also for the freedom of religion and the freedom of speech has just been subverted unbelievably here. And I can't see where, I'm trying to relate all these stories together, and they all have a similar scenario behind them. The taking away of our rights and the elite taking our property, basically taking our mind, body, and soul. With that, let me introduce Bert Krantz. Bert, I know you want to talk about Tony's case, so I just gave a slight introduction. Go ahead.
That was a terrific introduction, Greg, and thanks for having me on. It's very great to be back on again. You mentioned, that they used the Mann Act to convict Tony, and of course, as you know, the Mann Act didn't require any kind of forensic evidence. It was all done with testimony and slander. And you mentioned a three-pronged effort, a three-pronged plan or strategy in order to destroy the ministry. And they, of course, three prongs all come from the same poker, when it's all stems from the Vatican ultimately. But as you mentioned, the Vatican kind of sinking into the background behind, the different ecumenical movement, but also from the takeover of the governments. You see, of course, the government's bowing down and doing whatever the Vatican says. And of course, they used the Arkansas government and other states and the United States government mightily in their attempt to destroy our church. And really, when it boils down that Tony was put in prison because he didn't believe in the government and for speaking out, and not being afraid, really. Everybody is supposed to be afraid of the government. But Tony, never has displayed any fear to speak out and to speak the truth. And so, we don't, he's never believed in the doctrines, like homosexuality, it's all right for same-sex marriage, abortion, and so many things that are just too numerous to mention. And, the same thing regarding the Vatican, the Catholic Church. It's not even really a church at all, and the government, like speaking out how the government has no business dictating how we can preach the gospel or the Bible. They're not supposed to be involved in churches. That's supposed to be a rule of the government. It is the Constitution. And you mentioned, how they're just rendering the Constitution worthless. At any rate, one of the main vehicles that they use, or the main strategies that they've used in this effort, and it's going to come up more and more, and people need to be aware that they use this the Cult Awareness Network. I've mentioned it before in your program, and it's now called Wellspring. And it's a government operation. They act like it's separate, but it's not. It's the government, and it's behind all of the accusations, all the criminal court case, the child custody case, and all these lawsuits. So see, it's all together, and it's a government operation that's set up to close down real churches. But you notice they leave the Catholic Church alone, or like the Episcopalians, or the ones that have moved.
Are you there?
And boys and girls living together, and is something wrong, Greg?
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I thought maybe you weren't hearing me.
No, I'm hearing you.
Okay, great. So anyways, they believe in all this, pedophiles and, women with women getting married and men with men. So, the Vatican now is famous for this, and they promote it mostly behind the scenes, like they say they're against drugs, but they own the pharmaceutical companies, and alcohol, but they own the wineries and the distilleries and, birth control. They own the birth control companies. They have their finger in every iniquity. The Bible says that they're the mother of harlots and abominations. So anyway, this Cult Awareness Network has certain tactics that they use. What they did is they used to kidnap people, and they held them captive, and somehow they brainwash them, with different coercive methods, and get them to bring false accusations against churches. They were doing this for a long time, but they were destroyed after losing a big lawsuit to the Scientology Church. They were bringing false accusations against churches, but this one kid, he stood up against them, and the Scientology Church won the case for him, and then and then they forced them into bankruptcy. Okay, so now they're operating under the name Wellspring. So they just kind of went under for a little while, and you kind of like the way they said that the end of the USSR, but then those people didn't go away. They're still working on controlling the world. Okay, so that's where the FBI sent all these people, that these disgruntled church members that you mentioned, that they were put out of the church for like promiscuity and things like that, and the FBI sought them out, as you've mentioned before on your program, and they sent them over to this Wellspring, which was the Cult Awareness Network, which is a government operation, and they gave them the treatment. Okay, they say, okay, all of you, now when Tony's going to say this, you say that. And then his attorneys, they're going to say this and this and this, and they'll ask you that, and you say this, and that's how they built their case. They made a little choir. Now, that to where they all were singing in full orchestration and 4-part harmony. But some of them made mistakes, when they were in court, like they asked, well, I bet Tony ate better than all of you, but they would stutter on the stand because they knew, that Tony or Sue, they never ate better than anybody else. You can go to our church and go to any meal, and it's like a banquet. And people, our church is open door. People are invited to our church, and every piece of literature that's put out, and you can come up. Anybody can come up, and there's a meal served for anyone that comes up there. And you'd see what I'm telling you is the truth. That it's just like going to a banquet. I'm telling you.
Well, you know something, okay. I wanted to bring this up, and we'll get back to that in a second. But over the holidays, I was getting some stories from overseas regarding your ministry, and people over there who receive literature from you, then pass it out to people in Africa and all over. And I've noticed how pastors there connected with the Alamo ministry still to this day have been persecuted, put in jail. And then I contacted one of your members who wanted to come on the show, and he told me, he said, listen, I'm busy over the holidays passing out literature. And so the amazing thing about this story is, and then I checked your website, and you're still getting I think it was like 400,000 hits in a week. It seems to be that things are still moving forward with this message. And then I get a message, Tony put out a message stating his stance, and he seemed very upbeat and said, don't worry about me, just keep the message going. And it seems to be doing that. Talk about that right now, what the ministry is like right now.
Well, it's just the way that you saw it. We were very busy over the holidays putting out the Word of God, and we are very busy worldwide. We're into so many countries now, like Africa. We're all over Africa, India, the Philippines, Japan, China, Russia, all over the world. But people think that Pastor Alamo's just in such complete control over this congregation, like he can be everywhere at once while he's in prison, like we're just a bunch of mindless zombies or something. But, the church somehow functions, and the gospel continues to get out with Tony in prison. Mm-hmm. But I'd like to get back anyways to this technique that they're using, because they got these people following a script, and it's given to them by these attorneys and the Cult Awareness Network and Wellspring. And, I know you've studied the case, Greg, and you probably noticed that their statements and their testimony and their interrogatory answers, they're all very, very much the same or identical. Mm-hmm. And so
yes, go ahead.
Cult Awareness Network, Wellspring, they have this choir of people, and they've been thoroughly schooled and brainwashed, so they all speak like this highly organized government machine, and like they're like a choir. They've been taught, and so they got a script, and they're all coming out exactly the same. So what they did, they falsely testified against Pastor Alamo. They took him there over to Wellspring, and they got him to testify falsely. And then they got these judges and everybody hyped up about it in Arkansas, and they dragged Pastor Alamo into court there in Texarkana. The attorney's fees were about, a couple $1 million, but the attorneys weren't really fighting very much. You know about that. I know.
Right.
I've heard talk about it much. And they told Tony that if they fought for him, they'd get tarred and feathered, and Tony too. And they said they couldn't win the case. false witnesses were all stacked up against him and well trained. They were all saying the same thing. So not only that, but that FBI agent Randall Harris, he was the one that sought them out and brought them over to Wellspring, and he was right there in the court, sitting right in front of the witnesses, coaching them. Oh, say this, don't say that. Okay, don't answer that. Okay, and one of the attorney's wives runs over and says he's coaching them right there, But they told Tony, it's and they get away with this kind of stuff. So
of course, when the judge is not conducting a fair trial, but a kangaroo court, of course they're going to get away with it. And I think two things that really I remembered. The first thing was when the jury instructions were given, the jury went deliberated, came back with a question to the judge, and one of them was, if we don't see any child abuse here, can we still convict him? And I'm looking at that going, and the judge kind of skirted that question and said, just listen to what I wrote you. And they came back with when have you ever heard a jury state something like that? It's like, okay, if it's a robbery, and the jury comes back and says, okay, if we don't find he stole anything, can we still convict him? It makes absolutely no sense, does it?
Well, that's because Tony was already convicted in the media, and these people, they weren't in a cave. They knew what was going on, and they'd heard all these things, and it's been going on for years. Many years ago, the FBI, they went around to different stores that, Pastor Alamo had this Alamo design, where these jackets were. We worked on, a lot of the people in the congregation worked in the business, and we painted up these jackets and put rhinestones, and these stars were wearing them, like these. And the FBI went into all the vendors, like he was in Saks Fifth Avenue, Macy's, he was into just all these different big places, and Trump Plaza. He outfitted Donald Trump, Elvis Presley, Bert Reynolds, all kind of top stars. And the FBI goes in and says, these things are all being done with child. Come on, man, these stars, they're not going to be wearing some children's scrabblings, There was no children that worked on any of that stuff. But this is the kind of thing, and it's been going on for years and years. Like you said, 50 years back, I think I've mentioned before the different slanderous articles that were written, like in Rolling Stone and People Magazine and Reader's Digest, Time Magazine, for years and years and years, and they build it up, and then they keep saying these things over and over, and that one slander from the last thing, they make sure to bring it all up in the next time. And they got this conviction on Tony that way, and they always keep bringing it up and bringing it up. In every case that comes up, they drag up all the old stuff like it's been proven, and all it is a bunch of slander that they've said. But, People Magazine said it, so people believe it.
Yeah, exactly.
Go ahead.
No, what I was going to say was, as I started covering this story, I decided that I started looking around the internet and the country, and everybody had forgotten about it. And that's basically what was their plan. But what I started to do was to keep hammering away with it and always presenting the story, saying things over and over again. And my strategy was, if I don't have a lot of people working for me, what I can do is I can trumpet this message on a weekly basis, and then start getting out a press release to all these newspapers and not letting them forget it. And I keep sending out 20 to 30 a day, and I get responses back, and I've had people, say they're going to interview me, and then they don't. And I have about 6 lined up, and we're working on that for February and the end of January. And what I'm trying to do is keep this fresh in the minds of people. And whether it be 1 million or just one, I figured if one person can talk about it, then they'll send it to about 10 others. And it actually has really kept this story alive as best as I could do, even though they don't want to hear a word anymore about this. Your thoughts about how they just kind of there was big, huge clamor right when this happened, and then all of a sudden, once they got their way, nothing was said anymore.
Well, that's an old story. What do you hear about the Branch Davidians now? What do you hear? You don't hear anything. You don't hear really that much about 911 as far as any kind of investigative reporting.
Right.
All that stuff you have to seek deep into, because once they get their way, they don't want to talk about it. And if anything does come up, then they put in all this what do you call it? Like you're saying, controlled opposition. People come out with all these crazy things that they say about those things, so that the public hears stuff and they don't know what to believe. But that's exactly true. In fact, there was one point where they went to the radio stations and told them that they even talked about Tony Alamo. They would been closed down.
Yeah, they pulled their FCC license, right? Yeah.
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 So, yeah. So, this is.
Go ahead.
But you have that's their strategy, is to just say the same things over and over again, and people have to keep hearing it. They have to keep hearing it. But that's it, just to show you their effectiveness of it. That's how they get away with putting an 81-year-old man into a 175-year sentence in prison, but without any forensic evidence. There's no evidence. There's a bunch of people with a script saying the same thing, and then it's obvious that they're all going up there saying the same thing. And yet, with all this slander, it just shows you the power. Slander works.
Oh, and let me tell you, after I looked at the testimony, something that people really have to remember, and I've said it a number of times, is that even out of the 5 or 6 girls that they used and coerced, some of them even came back with written statements that they were actually lying, and they didn't care. And people just said, oh, well, the judge said he's guilty. He must be guilty. And people asked me, they said, Greg, you've been doing this story a long time. What's your hope? And I said, there's 2 things here. I want people to be aware that this could happen to them, that you have no freedom of speech and religion left. And 2, my other hope was that Tony would someday get out of jail because of this. And people would, and I know a couple people have told me they're going to start writing letters to get him out, things like that. And despite this huge conglomerate of people, the radio, Oprah Winfrey, all these people working together to make him out to be this child abuser, which he's not, that is really a hope of mine, that someday he does get out.
It's a great hope. And also your first point is a very big, too, that, our church, or any church that's in the forefront that's really preaching the gospel, is like a lightning rod. It's like a timetable or a time, you can tell what's going on by watching this, and you see what they're doing to us and think that it's not going to happen to other ministries. These things are happening to other ministries now, and it's coming down into more and more people are suffering from this. But people look the other way, back in the day when it was just happening to people like us. And that's a very sad commentary, because that's how it happened in Germany. That's what Wormbrandt said, how it happened over there in the communist countries. People, if the tanks aren't coming down my street, I don't want to get involved. I don't want to stick my neck out. Even though I know what they're doing is wrong, I can't say anything because they're just going to come right after me. And people are afraid of that, and they count on people being afraid. You remember Solzhenitsyn said that about the whole Gulag system. They had the people in fear. They never knew if they just said boo, they might end up with a tenor. 10 years up in Siberia, and you don't come back from those. Right.
Bert, hold that thought. We're going to come back in about 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal. We have to take a break right now. My guest is Bert Krantz of the Alamo Ministry. Back in 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening. Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity, invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.
Okay, welcome back to the second half hour of the Investigative Journal on this January 11th, 2016 day on our calendar. I'm your host, Greg Anthony, and you're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. Make sure you listen to my show this week. I'm going to have some really good shows regarding, of course, the taking away of our rights, our constitutional rights of freedom of speech, freedom of religion. That's why I have Bert Krantz on to show you that this isn't something that just happened years ago. This is something happening today, right before our eyes, watching our country being whittled away by a bunch of, I guess I should use the word, intelligent crooks who have figured out a way to usurp our Constitution over a course of 200 years. I believe that this was the plan in the beginning of the Jesuit order and our founding fathers. Not all of them, of course. Those who are on the inside. It was a great plan. Have freedom, have a country, a republic, a constitution. 50 states, each one with their own rights, working together with a federal government that would protect us from foreign enemies. But when the enemy is within, makes it difficult. Okay, enough of that. I'll get into those shows over in this week. But getting back to the importance of the Alamo ministry story, what's going on in Oregon right now, and most everyone has heard about the situation there. Members of the Idaho militia have come to Oregon, 3%, and they call themselves 3% of Idaho, to secure a perimeter around the refuge to make sure that it doesn't become a Waco-style siege by federal officers. So now we're seeing this connection between Waco, the Branch Davidians. You might as well throw in the Alamo ministry, because the same thing happened to them. They were stormed by storm troops, 100, people in our FBI, and they're coming there with guns and high-powered weaponry to find children playing on a swing. Now we have ranchers who are protecting, basically making a stand, stating that you're not taking our land. Now, you're seeing the taking of the Alamo, that they're trying to take the Alamo ministry land, the connection of Waco. And I think, Bert, looking back 7-8 years when we were talking about this story, it's coming to fruition right now. People can see the connection here. They're taking land, and it just isn't because of your freedom of religion. They use it all. they use everything in their power. The Environmental Protection Agency stating, well, these ranchers really don't know how to control their property. What's your thoughts about all this stuff going on now, and what can people really do?
Well, one thing, Greg, that I really want to point out, you mentioned the raid, the SWAT or commando raid that they did in 2009 on our church in Fouke. That was the second raid that they'd done. They did another raid like that in 1991 before Waco. And if we had had one weapon on our property at that time, we would have been Waco. They really wanted us to be Waco. They were hoping to find guns up there that we would resist. And it's the same thing when they raided us in Fouke. They didn't find a pop gun. They didn't find a knife. They didn't find anything. And yet these people are all trained that we're armed and dangerous. They're have seminars, telling how evil and wicked we are. And they believe this stuff, and they come in. I mean, you talk guns flailing. I mean, they had those laser dots set on those little children that were playing in the playground. They had them set right on their hearts, and they were ready to pull the trigger. And if somebody, I believe it was John Peeler mentioned on one of your programs,
right,
if somebody had sneezed, there would have been blood all over the place. So I know that God protected us from that, but it was also Pastor Alamo's wisdom in knowing that our weapons of our warfare are not carnal. We can't depend on guns. A perimeter around that property is going to play as much into the hands of the federal government as it does help out that person that's up there in Oregon. I know that because they have many more guns. You're not going to beat them with guns. It's not going to happen.
Right, and I remember even talking to Tony prior to the raid, this was after the 91 raid and prior to the 2008 raid. He had said they had tried so many times to infiltrate us and get us to take weapons and buy illegal weapons. And, John Peeler said Tony had no part of it. He knew exactly what they were trying to do. And I had said a long time ago on this situation in Oregon, when it happened, I said, there's a real quick solution to this. The government should leave and the people should put down their guns and work this thing out, and even if they think that will never happen, the solution of carrying those weapons there are going to be worse. And I'm not saying that people don't have a right to carry weapons and the Second Amendment isn't important. It's just
absolutely
they're using this to their benefit. I'm talking about the government, so they can create another Waco-style siege here this time on ranchers. That's my thoughts. And maybe, like some people have emailed me, said, maybe I think the government has a infiltrator even in the group there. That's
right.
The ranchers to make sure this thing goes the way they want it. What's your thoughts on that?
Oh, yeah, that's absolutely true. There's in the Bible where a follower of Christ took arms to defend the gospel, and that was Peter when they came to get the Lord. And what he ended up doing is he cut off that guard's ear, and the Lord touched him and healed the ear. Mm-hmm. Now, so how's somebody going to listen to you preach the gospel to them if you cut their ear off? See,
right.
That's not going to happen. So, you talk about being a Christian and you're blowing people away. It doesn't exactly register. How can it really register in people's hearts that you really have the love of God for them? So, it's not a Christian thing. Jesus said not to do it.
Yeah, exactly. And, like I said, when people had asked me about is it possible they've infiltrated this militia group? And I said, of course. Look at what they had so many different infiltrators trying to come into your church. John Peeler even told me he was one of them. And there were many more they tried to send there to get you to do things against the law so they could actually have a reason to come in there and shut you down, correct?
That's correct. That's what they did at Waco. They tried to do it with us, but Pastor Alamo was very wise in the Lord, wisely, would not go for any of that bait. In fact, some of these people, when they saw the testimony, you've read their accounts that they were converted to Christianity by Pastor Alamo's stand, and steadfastly not allowing any kind of weapons in the church or any kind of violence. None of that is allowed in our church. We're a true, just a plain and simple true ministry. Believe the gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ, the King James version of the Bible, and people like that, there's no law against that. There's no law against that. But they're making up these laws, these new laws, and they're calling evil good and good evil. And this is a sign that the world is coming to an end, Greg. It really is. The Lord's coming back very soon.
Yeah, and
people need to repent.
Another thing they're doing, and I've had this happen to me, people, if you go back to some of my old articles regarding the Vatican, and talking about what the Vatican and the Roman Catholic Church is all about, I still get emails from people, and probably perpetrators who are working with them, stating that my website is nothing but a hate speech website. And
right.
What happened is, also when I start putting up certain videos, they have a couple people that have taken some of my videos and put them on their channel. They've had their channel shut down for a while. They don't do it to me, but they limit the amount of viewers by a certain way they can keep it off of certain places where people see. That's why you see some really ridiculous satanic video get 5 million hits. And a very interesting video regarding the Vatican get maybe 20,000. That's how they control things. And Google is right there with them, I think.
Well, they have a lot of ways of controlling things. And really, one thing getting back to this, to our case, those women that you mentioned, the 4 or 5 disgruntled former members, they were totally programmed. Now, this is a very powerful means, and that's kind of why I really want to press on this.
Yeah, go ahead.
They're using to destroy good churches in America is because they have ways. They have coercive, they've got it down to a science between instilling fear, intimidation, coercion, gifts, promises, all the different techniques, and probably several things that I'm not aware of how they do. But they definitely have ways of programming these people into scripted testimonies that can destroy churches. They'll just say things about good pastors. That's exactly how they convicted Tony, and they just say the same thing, and then the media is all part of that and feeds it, and totally agrees and brings out all the same exact accusations and slander, and then they use that to convict Tony, right? And then they come in with these lawsuits for financial
restitution, yeah.
And then and they bring the same script before the same judges, and the media drums the same beat into the public, going for the properties, and then going for any kind of gleaning after any kind of finances that they can come up with. And now they got this suit going where these children that they actually had stolen out of the ministry are now suing the ministry. Now I'll guarantee you, Greg, I knew some of these children, and they were not like this. They were happy. They had wonderful childhoods, and now they're just bringing all kind of lying accusations. They've been conditioned and programmed to do this by this very powerful beast mechanism, and using this cult awareness network wellspring, it's like a CIA operation, to push this through, and it's what's happening in America right now. So that's the vehicle that they're using. That is their strategy to destroy churches, and it was very effective. Of course, they haven't destroyed our church. Pastor Tony, as you mentioned, is still very strong in the Lord, and his work, he's still bringing forth messages, and his work is still going out worldwide, and the gospel is being preached to the four corners of the earth, which is the Great Commission. So they haven't stopped that.
No, and I think that's an interesting aspect here. I mean, they basically, in a sense, what I see happening is that the ecumenical movement from just in the past 30 or 40 years has grown to a point where now the churches that are appealing to so-called Protestants, they have no idea what that even means anymore. To these kind of rock and roll churches, I call them, in a sense, in not that rock and roll, it has its place in our society and so forth, but these churches are basically infiltrated. And I gave an example of over the holidays, and I mentioned it on one of my shows. I went to my family had asked me to go to church with them, and I end up at this church called the Discovery Church, and it's in an industrial complex. And as I walked in, it looked like a theater performance, and that's exactly what it was. And this was a Christmas performance, but at the end, I noticed the pastor, and he gave the sign of Lucifer right before he put his hands together, a quick one. And that told me exactly what they're all about again.
It's incredible.
Yeah, and and I asked myself, I didn't mention it to anybody because I didn't feel it was the place to do that, and was with my family. And I've talked to them about this in the past, so I didn't want to damper the holiday spirit, in a sense. But it was, and I asked, why was he doing it? Well, he's giving that sign to let his people know who he's working for, that everything's under control. You see what I mean?
Oh yeah. He moved right in with the Vatican. You saw that Copeland bringing the Pope into his with his whole convention of thousands of pastors involved with his ministry, just open arms, just embracing the Vatican.
And what about, remember that guy in California? What was his name? I can't remember his name now. He passed away, but he had this huge golden church, or what was his name? Schuller. Yeah, I've heard that the Vatican owns that now.
I've heard that too, and I heard that his protege was Rick Warren, who was like one of the main Protestant evangelical ecumenicists that's dragging just millions of people back into the Vatican that call themselves Protestants.
Right, and you hear these stories. We talked when the Pope came here. I think people ought to understand what that meeting was all about. So why don't you remind people what you think the Pope was here for?
Well, classically, when the Pope comes, he kisses the ground to let everybody know that this is his property. And as you mentioned on your program, it wasn't just the dignitaries or the delegates to the United Nations that were there. It was all the world leaders themselves. By mandate, they came to listen to what he had to say. And this was a signal to everyone, and of course the news media played it all up, that everyone in the world saw that all the governments of the world are 100% behind everything that the Pope is saying, and everything that he's saying is right in concert with them. It's all just like what I was talking about at Wellspring, how they do with these witnesses, these false witnesses. It's the same thing with them. They've all got their story all straight together, and they're all working exactly together. And you look at the subjects that the Pope brings up and what he's talking about and his solutions to them, they're all the same thing that the governments are doing now. And they're all get together into a one world government, a one world church with complete control. And they do want to turn that West Coast into a park. In fact, they probably want to turn the whole United States into a park.
Exactly. And
herd the people into some, thick cities.
Yeah, exactly. One thing I wanted, before we run out of time, we have about, 5 minutes. One of the ideas was to, when people look at your ministry, they wanted to make sure that new people would be too frightened to even talk to you guys. Tell me about some of the new people since this has happened. Has your ministry attracted or talked to new people that have gotten involved with you despite the government's efforts to shut you down?
Well, yes, they have. The Lord is the one that brings the increase, and it's always been the case down through the years, even many years ago, even during the starting of the church, that people really come to our church in spite of everything that's going on in the world. The way the Lord draws people into his church is he visits them. He makes them know. He makes himself, reveals himself to them. And so a person that the Lord has revealed himself to and has directed to come to our ministry, they're not going to care anything what the world has to say. That's how the Lord did with me, and I've heard testimony so many times that, they read all the things that are on the internet about Tony, all the slander, but God let them know that this man is telling the truth, and opened my eyes to see that the things that he's saying is right. Just like the way that you're talking about the governments, the Vatican, all them joining together, and this Vatican-led New World Order. This is what Tony's been preaching for many years, and it has never been a popular message. But people that see it, they don't have any doubt about it, and people that have the guts to, or the courage to follow through and to count the cost and to lay down their life, pick up the cross, and follow the Lord Jesus Christ. That's what they're going to do.
Yeah, and it's interesting. In the last several months, besides some of the newspapers and radio stations I've been contacting in the mainstream, I've received several inquiries from people that I interviewed like 8 to 9 years ago that have started their own little blog. They've started things. They want to have me on the show again, and they're thanking me for bringing this information out, and want to talk about the Alamo ministry and what I've been trying to get across for years. And I find it interesting, like, for example, a guest I had on years ago wants me to come on and talk about this, and he's spreading the word. And this is up in that area in Oregon, the Oregon-Washington area. And that's exactly how this works, folks. We're not going to be able to get this message on ABC or CBS, but we can work. It's very important that when you hear this show, you send it to someone that you may think will have ears to listen. And if you can get one person, he may turn it on to 100 others. And it's amazing how God works in that way. But it also happens here when we preach this message, in a sense, on the radio, so people understand, that you have a right to your views of religion and speech in this country. And don't be frightened to look for the truth when it comes to this area. This is the final straw in picking out the truth, I believe, when you start connecting the Vatican to all this stuff. And it brings everything into play because, history and prophets in the past have told us what this is all about. Many people now have just listened to the other side. What do you think?
I think you're doing a great job with it, Greg, and what you're saying is right. This, being a Christian, being in Christ, having the Father, having forgiveness before him through the blood of the Lord Jesus Christ is the safest place in the world to be, no matter what's going on with the circumstances, what it looks like outside. In 100 years from tonight, nobody's going to care the little trials or tribulations we went through. People are going to care the decision that they made with Christ. That's what they're going to care about in 100 years. Mm-hmm. And I highly recommend, I implore anyone that doesn't know the Lord, give him a try. Ask him to come into your heart. Accept the blood that he shed for you. That's what you need to do. That's what people need to do. That's the only answer.
Yeah, and it's a good point. We have about, 2 minutes here. And anything you wanted to mention about what the ministry is going through right now, any new things that we haven't talked about, go right ahead, or maybe some comments regarding Tony's situation now.
Well, as I mentioned, Tony is very strong in the Lord. You've read his messages right there on your program, and you know that he's looking to Jesus. He's looking to the Lord, and that's from whence cometh our help. And however all this shakes out, we know that our prayer is that the Lord's will be done on this earth in my life, so that what I do in my life is Christ working in and through me, so that his will is done. And, that's where we really have control. Greg, you have control over your life. I have control over mine. And so that's the decision we have, is what we can do with our life. We're not going to do anything, that's going to change what the Pope does or what the government agencies does. Although, like you say, indirectly it can. But it's the Word of God. The Word of God is what is going to overcome the devil. He said it's a two-edged sword comes out of his mouth, and we want to be on God's side. We want to. It's not so much that we care that God's on our side. We want to be on His side, because if it's our thoughts, if it's our desires, if it's our goals, that's worthless. It's vanity. God's will be done on this earth. That's how Jesus taught us to pray, and that's they've been trying to destroy this ministry for many years, and now they found this way with this technique with these false witnesses and this programming, and I just really wanted to warn the people in this program about that also.
Okay, thanks, Bert. You know something? We only got about 20 seconds here, so let me just mention that if you want to go read more about this ministry, go to their website at Alamo Ministries, that's plural.com. And you can look at a lot of the things that's gone on at this ministry over the last 40 to 50 years, and then make up your own mind. Contact me anytime at gregbeacon@gmail.com, and we can talk about it. Thanks, Bert, and see you next time.
Thank you, Greg.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie, with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character, as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy, in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the Left Behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.